Welcome into the Business Outlook Survey Roundtable. We completed this survey over the course of 2 weeks that reached out to business leaders and tried to get a vibe for what's going on with COVID-19, where they expect their business to be from that point in time to what they see in the future. And so myself, Mike Vizo, the Director of Marketing, our CEO, Dave Davenport, and the General Manager of Wisconsin, Joe Skatarzak, are joining us for just some insight, some banter, and hopefully we come away with a few nuggets for you to use to improve your business.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started in a moment, but I just want to point out that a lot of these ideas are backward thinking, and we've got a webinar coming up next Wednesday, April
22nd.
April 22nd, that's going to talk about what you can do to prepare your business in the short and long term, focused on leadership and culture, on operational excellence, as well as business development. We've got 3 excellent panelists that are going to help you in those specific areas of focus to think through some ideas to help form your future plans. There's not enough, clearly you're going to see in the survey, there's not enough forward thinking going on. There's too much reactionary management, and that webinar will help you formulate the plan to put forward to help protect your business in the future. Let's get rolling. So the first question we asked, how impactful would COVID-19 pandemic be? And clearly, no surprise, big issue, right? Over almost 86% said average to high impact, with some changes in revenue. No one is looking at an increase in revenue.
Yeah, I'm sitting here taking a look, and I was more surprised by the lack of people expecting a dramatic drop in revenue. When you take a look at that, it's either people are prepared or they're just not really sure what's on the horizon. So that's going to be one area that I would look at particularly to say, monitor as the situation evolves.
Yeah, and I think that situation evolves is a really good point, Mike. I mean, it's important to remember that, this is data from a week or two ago, and as quickly as this whole situation is evolving, as we sit here today, we are talking to people whose revenues are growing up. Anybody doing, medical staffing or anything manufacturing related to medical supply chain, their business is going up. So that's definitely out there now.
That's a good point too, Joe, because we sent this out to the generalized public, but the people that we typically interact with also got that, and they were the majority of the respondents. So, we specialize in manufacturing, both from a food production side to a medical production side. We talk to a lot of construction, which is considered essential still. Mm-hmm. And so based on those different variety of businesses, that will impact the numbers on who feels this hurt more than maybe somebody else that's more retail centric.
Yeah, but clearly, even the essential businesses, we're seeing that those folks are seeing disruptions, and it is clearly not just from a lack of demand, but also challenges with supply chain and employees. So I think, even if you're in that essential business, clearly there's disruption, clearly there's problems.
Yeah, big impacts for sure.
So when we see, when we look at the prioritization, client outreach and stabilizing operations were clearly the front runners in what people's priorities were. I'm wondering though, if employee safety, I gotta believe that organizations are worried about their employees, and it was above cost reductions, which is good to see, but it's not as high. And I'm wondering if that might be because a lot of these folks are sheltering at home.
Yeah, I would assume that would be the case. I think when, at least from, a MotherG point of view, the very first question that was asked amongst the leadership team is, all right, how do we protect our employees? Where do they need to be? How can we make sure that they stay away from essentially ground zero of where COVID was popping up consistently? And so I think that wasn't as much of a priority because it may have been something that was handled first before more of the business centric part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Mike. I think it's such a given that, it's not really a priority because we've already done that. We've already taken care of that.
That was my, yeah. And I was also pleased to see that most organizations immediately reacted with client outreach.
Right.
And, I think sometimes we can focus inward in these times of crisis, and focusing outward usually generates better value.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting as we see the numbers come up for more of those conversations about what did you do to reach out to your clients, because it may feel like a sales play, but you owe it to your organization to keep revenue that's currently on the books. I mean, that's the best way.
Yeah, I mean, when we think of client outreach, the clients are paying us to do support and to help them, and any business that has clients, those clients value the organization, or they wouldn't be doing business with them. So I think it's short-sighted to think of it as a sales play. It's not a sales play. It's about making sure that your clients are getting what they need in this time of crisis, and it's not about trying to generate sales or protect. It's really about making sure that you're supporting that client base effectively.
Right, doing everything that you can to help, because again, whether their revenue curve is going up or going down, the impact is substantial.
Yeah.
Some of those impacts are positive. Many of those impacts are negative. Some of them are neither. They're just impacts. But how do you help them to manage those impacts and stay as close to business as usual as possible?
Yeah. So we clearly, a lot of people are sheltered at home. They're working from home, and no surprise, technology has been a distraction. It was the number one common theme across respondents. Almost, I think it was well over 2/3 of the people were complaining about technology. Oddly, though, we have this kind of almost split personality, right? Because the next 4 items we see, I'm more productive. I don't have distractions. Noise is a big distraction, and family is a distraction. So it's like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. And clearly, what seemed to me is that there are a split in the respondents, where some of them probably don't have kids at home,
Right.
and their technologies were may be challenged, but they're able to focus without the distractions of other people in the office. And then the other half clearly have little 4-year-olds at home, right, Joe?
Right. I just was going to say, at any moment, little Fred could come bounding in here just to say hello. So we'll try to keep that visit to minimum. But yeah, I mean, and it's different strokes. I mean, it's like the blog post from yesterday. I mean, you gotta keep a good perspective, a sense of humor about this, or you'll go crazy if you've got a little one running around, because they are. So interestingly, I've talked to a couple of people in the last couple of days also that the I'm more productive and no distractions. 2 people, very good friends of mine, have commented very directly, I'm an introvert. I love this because people are just leaving me alone. And so I am more productive because there are less distractions. And so, for me, I'm not wired that way, but we all know people that are.
Yeah, I probably tilt more to the introvert side. And so my wife is, down to 4 days a week. And that Friday I cherish more than anything else that she's home. It's because the baby is fed and taken care of. I hear little pitter patters upstairs. But I feel like I'm much more productive. But I think that's going to be one of the things I want to follow the most, maybe a month or 2 from now, because you get in this mindset where you're hunkered down and you're like, I'm going to just knock it all out. And then after a month or 2, maybe your enthusiasm starts to wane. Your just loneliness starts to set in, even if you are an introvert. So it's going to be really interesting to see if that becomes a roller coaster of emotions for the people. And what do you do with your organization to try to, stifle some of that lonely feeling, particularly if you don't have somebody in your household?
I mean, what's interesting is one of the clearly the biggest tech hurdle that people had was collaboration is difficult. Now, I know that, and from that, there were a myriad of other issues. We captured three of them. But clearly, the front runner was that working with your coworkers is a lot more difficult when you're at home.
Right.
Duh. And yet, we see Zoom has just blown up in growth. Zoom, has just blown up in growth because of the video conferencing ease that it presents. But yet, there's also challenges with Zoom and security and people's ability to use this tool. I think by the time we come out of this shelter at home, people are going to be very comfortable hopping on a video conference and working this way. So I think what we're going to find is that collaboration gets easier as we develop our skills around screen sharing. Certainly, the Microsoft Office 365 suite brings a great deal of collaboration to people, and most of the users, we know from our business, most users don't really understand how to use those tools about editing live and documents. This PowerPoint's a good example. We edited that from 3 different locations live at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, I'm from New Jersey originally, and the majority of my friends and family are back there, and so I have a fantasy football league that is more intense than it needs to be. But I talk to these guys via text most of the time, but now it's got to the point where we're having Zoom conference calls. Right. We got on, a lot of us use SharePoint, and so we're able to share documents and edit them back and forth, and it's really, despite the fact that all these tools were available, have brought us closer as a group of people that are separated by time zones. One friend actually just moved to London. So now we have this ability to stay in touch, and collaboration, as we get more comfortable with it, becomes less difficult because we have the right tools.
Right.
At the same time, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I just said necessity is the mother of innovation.
Yeah, for sure. And at the same time, the good old fashioned management by walking around, you see a new appreciation for that as well, right? Because you've mentioned that in a couple of different contexts, Dave, where, the ability to just sort of have that flyby conversation, you and Philippe, and whether it's talking about a certain client issue or something internally where we're updating a process, you lose that ability to just sort of have those ad hoc conversations. And as you mentioned, Mike, even if you are an introvert, some of that interaction becomes really, really valuable. And so it's collaborating differently for sure.
Yeah, very much so. All right. Mitigating the challenges from the cloud. This question really drives to the point, given that you've got these disruptions and likely revenue shortfall, what are you doing? And clearly, almost 75% of the organizations had some focus on customer retention, but oddly, 25% did not. And I'm wondering, are they distracted by other issues? Do they feel confident because their client base might be, in that essential business category? But clearly, if we looked at the entire survey of the people that were in that 25%, it did appear more that it was distraction from other issues, and that the revenue shortfalls were and employee issues were what was preoccupying their thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I also go back to this is such a quickly evolving situation, and the circumstances change, hour by hour, let alone day to day, let alone week to week. And so, in terms of the people that we're talking to, we're clearly having different conversations today than we were having this time last week, let alone 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago, in terms of, again, some people's businesses have started to boom again. Others, they're really struggling and they know it. And so they're in survival mode. But there's an awful lot, the ruthless indifference of the bell curve, there's an awful lot that fall in the big meaty middle, where it's pretty close to business as usual, and now they're starting to look at some of those strategies and figure those things out, and talk about, okay, how do we move forward from this?
Yeah, I think the common pitfall that a lot of organizations make decisions around their business in times of stress like this is that they reduce focus on sales.
Yeah.
They hunker down. It's a
Right.
hunker down mentality, and the reality is that when sales are down, we need to invest in business development, not to distract from it. And I'm not saying keeping poor performers, but what I am saying is that it is a good time to sharpen the axe on the biz dev team. Make sure that those people are trained. Possibly add staff. Not one respondent was considering adding more sales staff right now.
Right.
And that, that's not necessarily surprising, but I'm not sure it's the right decision.
Yeah.
I think, maybe you don't have to add staff, but certainly, an increase in marketing, we also see virtually no one looking at increasing marketing, and yet this is the time that you want to be out in front of people that are struggling. And if your competition is hunkered down, it allows you to make some big gains.
There's two interesting things that I thought of when looking at this. One, during your podcast with Jody Williamson of Sandler Training, he asked the question, if you could hire the perfect salesperson that you know is going to be successful, how many would you hire? And the answer is obviously we would hire an infinite amount of salespeople that we know that are going to be amazing. And so then it becomes an inward question of why aren't they as successful as maybe you anticipate them being? Are you identifying the wrong talent? Are you not giving them the correct tools to be successful? And so when you look at a question that says nobody's going to hire more sales staff, it's not just the revenue loss right now, or I guess the bottom line that you're cutting into, but more of, do you trust your own instincts to hire the right person, particularly at this time? So I thought that was,
this is a perfect time to invest and train people.
exactly.
It's not convenient really when you're disjointed like this, but my son started a new job 2 weeks into the shelter at home, and it's a sales position, and they're spending the first really the first month of his employment is all training. It's all virtual, but a lot of training is where you're sitting in front of a screen anyway. Why not take this time to really focus on the skills and development? I know we are at MotherG, we're spending a lot of time improving our marketing, investing in sales development and skills training.
Right.
And I thought the second interesting point that I saw was the uptick, at least from my point of view, in marketing to current client bases. I got an email, or my wife got an email today. She's in the medical field, so she's still working as business as usual. And North Face sent an email that said, hey, we want to do something special for anybody in the medical field. You get 50% off anything that you buy. I think that they're running the special for like a week or two. That's an uptick in sales and marketing. Like that, you don't think of it that way, but they're comfortable with delivering that message. And then that mitigates some of those revenue shortfalls because they're bringing in people that may not want to spend $150 right now on a North Face jacket, but you can kind of deal with the $75 purchase right now, particularly if you fall in that category where you're not losing any money at home because you're not laid off.
Plus, it helps build brand awareness.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the marketing piece being, again, the fluid situation, the messaging is important. As our customers' perspectives are changing, we need to meet them where they are and be responsive to that. So that requires updating the messaging.
Ethical selling.
Mike, can you comment on this other category? It's hard to describe other in general terms.
It was really interesting because, we gave them a couple of different options. And so the people that selected other, they went with either reducing payroll was the way to mitigate shortfalls, or they were just going to hunker down on their service delivery. And so it was kind of a 50-50 split what the other actually meant. But the interesting piece kind of ties into the next part that we'll see, the next slide that we'll see, if they're going to actually release people or reduce headcount. And so anybody that answered other in the previous slide answered they're absolutely going to cut headcount as their way to help with revenue shortfalls. So they were tied hand in hand.
And clearly, the majority of people are looking at payroll reduction as a cost-cutting tool. And I think, unfortunately, one of the reasons is that, and I say unfortunate because there's a lot of people directly affected, right? We now have over 25 million people
Right.
On unemployment, which is the most dramatic increase in unemployment ever. And the reason being is that's a very immediate cost reduction. You can pull the trigger, furlough those people, or lay them off, and now that cost is no longer being incurred. And if I'm running a factory where I'm down 30% in order or maybe more, I don't need those people. I can't make parts that I don't have an order for. I can't, run an operation. I can't do the development and efforts that go around that production if I don't have any business. So it's very clearly the case that payroll reductions. I'm wondering though, with the payroll protection plan assistance and loans, whether that might curtail some of these organizations. And certainly that's not going to help the large corporations, but it certainly does the small businesses. So I'm wondering if we're going to see that tail kind of start declining now that those loans are going through and being funded.
I think. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Joe. No, go ahead, Joe.
I think that's a really good point, and it's an excellent question. And again, such a fluid situation, changing so quickly. Just this morning, this morning, you see the headlines that the SBA is out of money for round one of these PPP loans, and so what impact will that have? And certainly, the other thing you read a lot about is small businesses and the amount of capital that they've got to be able to weather this. It's not as much as you may have expected or you may have hoped. So that time frame to be able to weather this storm is really going to vary a lot, and that's where the PPP stuff really becomes important. We'll see where it goes, but that certainly is a big open question.
I thought there's two pieces that are interesting to me. Selfishly as an IT company, I thought it was interesting to see the people that said they're going to cut IT and technology. And so I wonder if that's based on them still being an essential business and being completely in the office. But where would they, take that assumption that that's an area you could reduce?
You can reduce that if you have capital projects that you were going to initiate, upgrades, migrations, that kind of thing, and you could furlough those decisions. And I see that almost hand in hand with business consulting, right? These are things that, in capital projects. So I think that those are areas that you can furlough. And if your business is closing, that's one of the things you can eliminate. If you need to shut your business down for a couple of months because you're not an essential business, then you might eliminate that. I kind of see, the business consulting, certainly inventory. If you don't have the orders, cut inventory. Capital projects, because they can be pushed out. Again, though, we see this decline in a third of the organizations cutting sales and marketing, and I just really question that. I think that needs to be really considered thoroughly whether that's the right decision, versus trying to take advantage of this time against what other competitors might be doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, from a marketing perspective, and I feel like sales and marketing go hand in hand. The marketing team is trying to explain and almost not sell your product or your service to the masses. And then the sales team acts as a marketing extension as well, because they're getting brand awareness with every conversation that they have out there. And so if you don't have those conversations, how do you expect to generate revenue, stay relevant in the conversation? Mark Cuban had a really great article out, I think it was about a week or two ago, but he said now is the most important time to get your brand message out there, because the way that you treat the general public and your internal employees right now is how people are going to perceive your brand going forward. And so if you don't show them that you care, you're not going to have a business in 5 years.
Well, and I think that's a really, really good point, Mike. And it goes to the, you're not going to have a business in 5 years. I mean, it may not take anywhere near that much time. Where are you going to be? Q3 starts in 6 weeks, right? And so Q1 was reasonably normal because this all sort of blew up mid-March. Q2 is lost. Q3 starts, it's not that long. And so what's it going to look like in Q3 and Q4 when some of these restrictions are coming up, we're returning to normal to no small degree, right? That's where you'll see those impacts, I think. I think you're spot on there.
Okay. This one, it disturbs me. We ask the questions. Technology companies are going to ask some technology questions, not all business, because frankly, every business today runs on technology in some form or fashion. It's a foundational aspect. We look at the capital infrastructure, we look at the personnel or intellectual capital, and then we need to look at technology because technology is the core enabler. Only 27% of the people were correctly concerned with scams, and over half had very little concern about the scams that might be coming out with COVID-19, and yet the scams have accelerated to unseen levels from new attack vectors, new phishing scams, new security threats that are presented by people working from home where the technology isn't locked down. It's really the opposite reaction that people should be having. And I really think we urge hypervigilance right now. It is the time that you have to be most careful. People are distracted and they are susceptible because of their anxiety to click on things that, COVID updates. One of the scams we saw was where they took the John Hopkins live update, dynamic mapping and updates, and they've become one of the sources on the internet for experts or for experts in knowledge share. And the bad actors mimicked the site while installing ransomware in I think they call it Corona 1.1 attack vector. So really risky environment, yet people seem to be laissez-faire.
Yeah, I think the most staggering stat that we saw, and this wasn't even recently, this was maybe a month or two ago, the job postings for attackers and hackers, they're getting paid $700,000 a year that they're looking for these people. There's full-on marketing plans dedicated.
Hackers having professional businesses where they are out recruiting employees to hack businesses, and they're paying those people $250,000 a year.
There's sophisticated marketing, drip marketing campaigns that are specifically dedicated to phishing scams. I mean, it is a full-on business, and it's organized. It's organized crime.
Right, and it is a full-on business and then some. I mean, no small business certainly should make any mistake in thinking that it's anything but that. These are not individuals sitting in their parents' basement, that sort of cliche or that stereotype. These are absolutely well-run businesses. Mm-hmm. They're hiring, they're growing. They've got full-blown support desks set up to help you figure out how to access Bitcoins to pay the ransom. I mean, these are absolutely 100%, and that their revenue curve is going like this.
Yes.
It's an absolutely extraordinary opportunity for them, those businesses, and they are businesses, to increase the revenue.
Well, this is a time where people are curious. They're wondering what's going on. They want the updates. I hear COVID update, 100 people die, in a nursing home. I want to click that link. And if you send that email out and it looks like it's reputable, it's from the New York Times, and here's, the headline, oh man, I want to click on it. And little do you know, and by the way, it may actually send you to that article after it downloads some spyware or some ransomware onto the machine. So really, really scary time. The other thing, there's definitely a disconnect here. Now, we asked the question: is your business continuity plan running smoothly? And clearly, 2/3 of the businesses feel like they're in pretty good shape. Unfortunately, 1/3 do not, and those folks need some help. But 2/3 felt that that their BCP was running smoothly, and yet only half of them are testing those backups. So clearly, there's a disconnect there. If you're not testing your backups, you don't know if your BCP is running. The answer maybe means no, right? I mean, if you're unsure whether you're testing your backup, you're not testing your backup.
Right, because if you were, you would know. Yeah, and that's a great point. And to the earlier discussion about the ransomware and those threats and the phishing scams, by far and away, the number one way to remediate damage there is to make sure that your backup and your disaster recovery are rock solid. And if you're not testing, you can't know.
Yeah, and the fact that you were able to move your business from in the office to work from home, and people in both locations is not a test of the business continuity plan.
Right.
It is an execution, and there still may be holes in that plan if you're not testing all aspects. So listen, the idea that maybe you could argue that business executive says, well, I have an IT department and that's their responsibility, so I'm assuming they're getting it done. The reality is any good IT department, whether it's in-house or it's outsourced, is going to validate with business leadership that their backups are tested, that they are recovered, and that the BCP, any holes in the BCP are identified and discussed. So any business leader should know exactly where they stand on backup, disaster recovery, and their business continuity plan.
Right.
Do you feel like the people that answered yes to the business continuity plan are very much linked hand in hand with those that are planning for the future, who are using this time for innovation?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that leads right into our next slide, Mike. Can we afford to look ahead, or can we not afford to look ahead? And I think that, clearly, there are some that are focused on future plans, but many are just trying to hunker down and deal with today's distractions. And there is correlation, right? Between those that are testing and looking at BCP, and I think to those that are forward thinking, but the numbers don't match up well. And look, I know I can appreciate the distraction from COVID, but you need to set aside some time to think about what are the opportunities, what are the threats, what's my competition doing, what are my clients doing, what are my suppliers doing, what are my employees doing, and how are we going to operate in this. Now, we just heard Wisconsin has extended another 30 days their shelter at home. I suspect Illinois is going to follow suit, possibly longer. I don't know. Pritzker could be ultra conservative on that front. I think not necessarily agree with that, but that's aside. But we must be looking forward. The health and well-being of our organizations are on line.
Yeah, and certainly this is a dramatic shift in our world in lots of ways. And anytime you have that, it presents both challenge and at the same time opportunity. And it'd be foolish to not look for ways to respond to that opportunity, both for the sake of our organization as well as our customers.
And what was that phrase that you said about 15 minutes ago, Dave? Innovation comes from necessity, or something to that.
The mother of innovation is from necessity.
I mean,
it backwards, but
I mean, that's about right for me. But I mean, it's absolutely true. I think that, speaking from MotherG's standpoint, we had a really strong business continuity plan because we had thought about not maybe necessarily this type of pandemic, but we had thought about instances where we would need to work from home, where we would need to be flexible. I mean, we just went through a major remodel of our whole office, and we had a lot of people disjointed and they needed to be flexible, and we were misplaced. That was almost like our testing point for a business continuity plan and how to work from home. I know that I worked from home for several weeks. So, you know, we had an unintended leg up when it came to that, but it also prepared us for a time like now where we're able to look at this and innovate and move forward.
So, you know, if I were in the meeting planning business, I would be wondering, with people's comfort level going up dramatically with video conferencing, might people think, well, geez, I don't know that I want to go away to Miami to a conference and spend 4 days out of the office and away from my family at great expense to do that. I'm just going to wait and look at the content virtually. And might those meeting planners start thinking, you know, what if we just do the event virtually? Mike, you and I are going to attend an event in May. That's a virtual trade show, right?
Yeah.
Virtual seminar. And you know, I think there's a great number of changes that are going to prevail as a result of this crisis. And I think the organizations that embrace it and that feel like they are looking for the opportunities are going to come out ahead.
Yeah, engage the leadership team in how might we use this to our advantage, whether it's internally, how do we tweak the culture, how do we update some process, whether that's operationally, sales and marketing, finance, you name it, but how might we leverage this opportunity to get better, because it is going to end. You know, we're not looking 2, 3, 5 years down the road until we sort of return to normal. It's weeks and months until that process starts.
I think.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to take a point there and say culture is going to be such a important key to the immediate success of your business afterwards. If everybody still feels like they're a part of the organization, if everybody doesn't feel burnt out, if everybody feels like you were taking care of them through this crisis and were receptive to their needs, or at least empathetic to their needs, that's going to bring them closer to the organization and feel more loyalty. And without employee turnover, that saves you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in having to retrain and do all of these other things that are unintended consequences of people leaving. And so I think if you look internal, if the first place that I would start is look internally, and how do you keep that same cultural engagement and move that forward, so that way you don't have to deal with other headaches once everything starts to rebound.
Yeah, and you know, clearly what comes to mind, we're hosting a webinar next Wednesday. I'm not sure when this will post, but Mike, what's the date? Wednesday?
April 22nd at 11 a.m.
11 a.m. April 22nd, with 3 experts in leadership, in operational excellence, and in business development. We've got 3 leaders that can really help you think through, how do we come out of this? What should I be preparing for now? How should I make sure that my business in the short term is protected and safe, and in the long term thriving and growing?
Now, we talk about MotherG and say safe, stable, and secure is how your technology should be looked at. But that's the same thing for your business as a whole. How do you stay safe right now? How do you stay stable? And how do you secure your future? And that's the way that I would look at it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Feel free to download the report, and we welcome your thoughts and comments. That's today's session.